Hello, my name is Lee Wallace and I work for Rivet Games on 3D art and technical setup for TSW. So now I'm working on the DB BR204 locomotive for a TSW DLC for TrainSimWorld release. The locomotive's based on an old DRV100 class 1970s shunter locomotive, and we're basically creating this DLC so we can release it for an existing dovetail route, one of the German routes that dovetails get out already on the catalogue, and we'll put out scenarios in a tutorial for this with this locomotive. So I can show a bit of the train model here in 3D Studio Max. So what we've got is this is the model of the locomotive in 3D Studio Max. This is the external model, so it's no cab in the model or no interior. But what you can see here is it's basically a quite high resolution detailed model, and it's got basically a bone skeleton set up for transferring into TSW, and then this will allow the player to interact with the locomotive, opening doors, driving the locomotive, operating windows, window wipers, external stuff like this. So if I choose some of the components, you can see with the bones that we can manipulate the components on the cab. Also, this is the same for features like the window wipers, the side window will operate in the game, the louver doors at the top. Whenever the fan's operating, then these will open in game as well, so these have been rigged up to open, so you can see how they open in the rigging. In terms of the model then we've basically got different LODs for the model. So if I show the high LOD, which is the highest detail one, then you can see the amount of detail that's been put into this model. We've cut in the vents for the side for the engine. It's got various logos and decals along the side. At the front will have the DB logo. This will be in the red traffic livery for DB, which is, although these logos aren't really in a lot of use now, a lot of them are owned by private contractors and stuff. This is the livery that the player would expect to see if they've seen the logo still in use today. Mainly used for shunting and creating consistent yards nowadays, but it adds a wee bit of extra playability to some of the German yards and German routes that Dovetail's got available by giving us shunting scenarios that you can create a consistent another loco could pick up later on in another scenario. So it's quite good just to give that extra playability. In terms of the detail level, you can see that it's got a lot of the detail for the buffers and the pipework and the bogie detail. We've added additional components outside. These are used to control the brake valve and pressure, which is an external thing on this locomotive. It's a diesel mechanical locomotive, so it's quite old school. Then I'll show some of the reference that we've used for the locomotive. So there's a lot of pictures on Google that show the locomotive and the actual DB livery that we've created. It's the same livery that they use for the Train Simulator 1 locomotive that was released recently. So you can see different pictures of it here. Some of the older ones, again in the traffic red. There's a few different liveries available. There's a Railway livery, this is the old version, pulling passenger coaches. But when the locomotive was surveyed, it was actually in press colours. So it was the blue, and you can see the press distinction logo on the front and the 204 branding. So a lot of this has got press branding on the side and the logos on the side, but a lot of this is more or less the same logo. There's a few different variations in terms of the vents at the side. Some of the variations of the 204 and the V100s have got different vent configurations on the side. So what we've done is we've based ours mostly on this press logo, but also used the DB reference pictures that we've got for the vent placement. For the one we've got, which is fewer vents on the side, but apart from that the rest of it's the same. In terms of the press logo, when the reference pictures show a lot of the logo in detail. There's a few different configurations you can see with the railings around the front of the logo, which the DB one doesn't have. It's only got the poles for the railings, so that's why we've done it in that configuration. But a lot of this detail for the undercarriage and the buffers and stuff, a lot of this is the same as the reference on the DB one. So whenever we're doing Train Simulator World models, we take them into Substance and we use a PBR texture pipeline for TSW, which separates out your different channels for your metallic and your roughness, your ambient occlusion, and it gives you a lot more realistic material reproduction than UE4. So if I basically switch off in Substance all my layers that I've got for this loco, then this is essentially showing the model that we've exported from 3D Studio Max into Substance. So you can see it's all the same polygons, it's got the same flat grey colour that we had in 3D Studio. What we do in Substance is we layer these up with, basically we start off with a blank canvas of defining a lot of our materials that we want to use. So this is basically just showing the areas of the model. If I show the mask for this, then this is defining where the red metal is going to be used on the locomotive. And then if I switch some of these on and off to show how we've built up this texture. So we've basically got a base red colour that's picking out the areas that it's going to be red. And then we've got a colour overlay just to tweak the red so it matches some of the other DB locomotives that are in the game already. And then we've also applied some dirt effects to this and a height map paneling effect. So if I change the lighting in this, then you can see what these are adding. So you can see with this, then you're getting the effects of the almost hand-worked bashed metal plating along the side of the loco. So you can see there, if I get the lighting right on it, then you can see that this kind of roughness value for the dirt effect to show the wear and tear of the paintwork, and basically just because it's not clean, then you can see how this will be picked out in the lighting in the game. We work between Substance and UE4 to try and get this balance correct, so whenever you see this in UE4 you'll see the lighting is more pronounced and the paneling effect and the reflection's a lot more noticeable in UE4 than it is in Substance. So it's striking that balance between the different materials and the look that you want. If I switch on all the shaders that we've got, so this is showing all the shaders that we've been created for this locomotive, and then you can see what's happened is basically when we export the model from 3D Studio Max, we offset any of the animated components, and then this means whenever we bake shadows in Substance that you don't get the shadows baked onto the components that are going to be animated. So the biggest example with this is the wheels. You don't want your shadow baking into the wheels. If the wheels were in situ, then it would bake in the shadow of the undercarriage onto the wheels, and then when the wheels are turning, that shadow wouldn't update because it's baked into the texture. So that would basically just stay in place and you would see that shadow going round as the wheels are going round. So that's one of the things that we try and do before we bring the model into Substance. We can do the same components like fans, because then we can access these in Substance, we can paint around these, and then when we pull the model back together again to export it into Unreal, then a lot of these components will be put back into place. Same with door handles as well. You don't want the door handle getting a shadow into the door, and then when you operate the door handle in game, then the shadow stays on the door. Ideally you want that shadow to move. So because Unreal's got dynamic shadows in it as well, then basically you'll still get shadows projected into these components that we've offset, but you just won't get the baked shadow from the Substance texture on the doors or on the wheels whenever they're moving. So this is the interior cab model for the 204. So basically what we've got with this is, if I switch off most of the components, then this just shows the breakdown of how we split the model out for TSW and UE4 and stuff. Basically this is the main desk hub of the driver's desk for the 204, and because the 204 is essentially one cab with two cabs inside, then basically what we do is we've separated out the different parts of the cab that will be duplicated over between front and back cab within the same cab area. So you can see this desk area which I've got here highlighted, then basically this desk area is the same on this side as it is on this side, just at the opposite for the front and the back of the cab. So what we've done is we've treated this desk area like a separate cab, and we've basically set this up and set up the skeleton so you can operate the controls and drive the train from this cab, and then when we take the train into UE4, that cab's duplicated for the rear cab, and it's got all the same controls set up and the same mappings and stuff for the buttons and switches, and it's also got the same decals and stuff on it. So these are the animated components of the driver's cab. So you've got the throttle wheel, the reverser key, some of the switches that are operating
in TSW. The main switches that we've got operating are the PZB switches and the SIFA and SANDA, both brake levers, and both engine switches for operating your own engine, and if you've got a multiple unit connected, then you can start and stop the engine on that loco as well. We've also rigged the seat in the 204 so that can be animated. So you can see how the seat can change height and then it can move back and forth as well. So in terms of the functional displays in the DB204, when we watched some of the reference videos of the driver driving the loco when he was doing shunting operations, a lot of the screens in the cab weren't actually used. The multifunction display in the radio, which he might use in daily use, but probably mostly if he's on mainline traffic. So we chose the screens to implement that he actually uses when he's doing the shunting procedures, which is what the scenarios would be based on. So the main displays was it would have the PZB unit, the AZ720, and on the left that shows the BZB line speed, and on the right hand side it shows the actual speed of the loco in kilometres an hour. That seemed to be the primary display that the driver was using. The rest of it, because it's an old school mechanical loco, then it has been retrofitted with a lot of the electronics, but these are more if he was taking it on the main line, which some of the scenarios will go on and off the main line, but we won't be implementing the multifunction display the way you've got in some of the mainline passenger traffic. In terms of some of the other functionality, we've got some digital or old school analog displays at the rear that show oil temperature and water temperature of the loco. And we've got a few other switches at the back. These ones control the headlights for the front and rear, and they're all on individual switches as well, so you've got your centre front light and both your side lights for the front, and then you've got the rear centre light and both rear side lights. Whereas in a lot of the modern locos, then you've only got your front and back, and the loco can choose which ones, whenever you flick the switch, which needs to be on depending on the operation. There's a box here at the back with some SIFA controls on it that we've operated. So some of these can be operatable by the player to switch on and off SIFA and control the shunting gear mechanism. Some of the textures for the 204 were created in Photoshop for decals, and then these can get applied within Substance onto some of these white polygons that you see here for your desk decals. These ones that have got the names of the switches, there's some desk badges and stuff there for the model number of the loco, and these are the indicators for the reverser gear, so you know which one you're actually selecting, and some of the names as well for some of these lamps, which are all in German just to basically match the reference that we've got for the locomotive. If I show some of the decal sheets that were used for these, so we've got the original decal sheet, which has got a lot of the information for the displays and switches, and we've got this second decal sheet which picks out, again some of these are at the side of the PZB boxes. This is indicators for heat temperatures and water temperatures for the engine, and then we've got other things like the first aid box, and additional markings and branding for parts of the components throughout. So you can see wherever it's showing these white labels, some of the labels you can see in Substance depending on how the texture's made. So you can see this one, and you can see the one on the side here. Some of the other ones are just showing up as basically white polygons which are mapped in 3D Studio Max, and whenever we take it into Unreal, then you'll see the text that's displayed on these, which is white on a white background in Substance, so that's why they're not showing up in here. The same for some of these displays which are here. These ones will display the speedometer values and the PZB line speed values in the text, and we've got a few different readouts here for temperature and stuff. In terms of texture in the cab, you can see that there's a lot more different types of surfaces and materials used in the cab. Most of it's this green metal, but you've got the fabric for the seat and the plastic and leather for the seat. Some of the buttons are more kind of glossy plastic, some of them are more of a matte plastic, or you've got a bit of satin metal. So in terms of, that's the good thing, the advantage with Substance is in terms of creating all these surfaces, you've got a lot of control in Substance and how these are created and then taken into Unreal using a PBR pipeline. So you can see again, this is the model essentially from 3D Studio Max that you see, so it's essentially the grey model. The same colours, and basically the components are separated out. Again, the same as the external local, we've chosen certain aspects and components of the model to be separated off from the rest of the model so they don't get a shadow baked in. The main one in the 204 was the handbrake wheel, which you see here, which whenever it goes into position just here behind the door, then if that's left in place from 3D Studio Max, then it will bake a shadow into the substance model there. So again, we've offset that so we don't get that hard shadow when you're operating the wheel and the shadow stays in the same position. Again, the same, we've got door handles and the handle and the actual window frame that slides back and forth when it's operated. Apart from that, the rest of this is baked in place. Most of it, even though the seat moves up and down and the throttle wheel moves, the shadows on these isn't ray traced, so it's not accurate enough to actually display a firm shadow on the desk, so we can leave these in. The same with the seat shadow, it's not given that accurate shadow that we have to move it out of place. What we'll do is we'll just switch off some of these just to show different type of surfaces. Whenever we're taking a model into Substance and starting the texturing process, then what we'll tend to do is we'll basically block out the larger areas of colour, just the same way you would in the painting, so you're basically defining your bigger values first, and then you can see across the model where that value falls and what are your key colour components. It's almost like with Substance as well, you're actually defining your key surfaces. So for this in the cab, one of the biggest components was the green shell that you can see here. So this is basically the green metallic shell that you can see. So I basically blocked in that colour first, and then I moved on to the desks, which is a slight variation, a different green. If I change the lighting in here, you can see that there is a slight difference between the desk green and the wall green, and that was in the reference, so I wanted to capture that as well. And then basically we've got some of the lower components like this silver metal paneling along the bottom, so it was good to capture that as well and block in these colours, and then basically start blocking in some of the other bigger values, like some of the red levers and the black gloss switches, basically anything that defines surface type. So light grey satin and stuff, black satin, I started defining values, and you can see quite quickly how that fills in, and that gives you that kind of spatial awareness of what you're actually texturing and what parts do you want to focus on in the cab. So a lot of the other components when I started picking them up was, if I go to the plastics and switch these on, you'll see when the plastics enable that basically a lot of the components in the cab are plastic. You've got different plastics on the steering wheel, you've got a lot of this tubing and wiring at the rear, so a lot of these were singled out and created. What I would do is I would tend to pick out the plastics that are black plastic and block them in first using masks. So you can see here that I've masked out the cables, so these are all the cables that are in the cab, and the rubber seal around the window. And when I mask these out, then I'm basically defining these as similar surface types. Basically I'm picking out the individual colours, so we've got grey cables, this red trunking cable, and then the kind of black corrugated cable at the back. So picking out the kind of surfaces as well. Again with the steering wheel, that's got quite a distinct kind of roughness pattern on it that you can see here. That was kind of in the reference as well, so it was quite good to kind of match that in Substance. So you can see how that's picked up some of the wood effects. That's enabled the floor, so if I show the floor surface, then again this is showing the area that I've masked out for the floor to go in. And the floor uses, it's almost like a kind of rubber mat with these black squares on it, or these kind of height squares on it, and it's got some dirt and stuff on it. And then what I also done was I painted it out around the pipes, because in the reference material the rubber matting was cut away around the pipes, and these are screwed onto the base plate floor underneath. So it was quite good to do these as well. And the same kind of getting these to fall within the steps and the lower step area. And again this is painted out where this other desk will be duplicated over. So you can see taking that into account where that desk's going to go, painting that mask out, so when we duplicate the desk over and unrail for the rear cab, then you can see how we've painted that out there. Again, and some of the other strengths with Substance is you can define your leather and your fabric materials. So if I just change the lighting, then you can see you've got a bit of leather material with a bit of roughness value, and then you can see how your fabric on your seat is behaving differently from the leather. So again, that's the advantage of PBR, and that's what we're getting with UE4 and Substance for the pipeline. The desk had this kind of, it's like a quite unique roughness pattern in it. So you can see it there. So it's quite a really old, kind of almost like the paint's layered up over the metal. So if I switch off all the layers on the desk, then you can see that, so this is the base kind of green colour that I've used. And then this one's adding some of the roughness value in it to give it that kind of layered paint effect. I don't know if it's paint or metal, it's hard to tell. And then we've got some scratches that we've added on here, and then a bit of colour variation. This just adds a bit of colour variation across the desk, so it's not consistently all the same wear and tear. And then we've added some roughness, so it's different lighting across the components of the desk. And then again some more layered paint bump and a bit of edge wear as well. And these just all can add to you can see the different roughness values where almost the hands have been placed on the desk and scratches into the paintwork. So that just kind of adds to the realism of it. So this is the first draft of a tutorial for the 204, just to allow the player to get up to speed with the controls of the 204, starting it from a cold start, and basically just a short drive down the line and then bringing it to a stop again. This follows the same process and procedure as like the other locomotive tutorials that TrainSimWorld's got, and this is basically just placed in a German route that Dovetail's got and released now. That we'll be using one of the Dovetail German routes for the 3 scenarios and the locomotive tutorial. But before I board the train, you can see the effects of the Substance roughness values and the wear and tear and stuff whenever you're standing just at the right angle of the lighting. You can see some of the scenery being reflected in the train and the metallic paint on the side and some of the warping with the metal panelling and stuff. You can see some of the dirt and the wear and tear that's kind of applied and picked up as well, which is quite nice. It kind of adds to that realism effect of the loco whenever it's using the PBR texturing process. But if I board the loco now, again this is just a work in progress version of the tutorial, just to do a mock-up for first pass. But you can see inside the cab, it's really dark on this because of the time of day we've chose for the tutorial. We wanted to choose an early morning run, as if the driver's just getting to the locomotive to start it up for the day ahead. So I'll follow some of the tutorial here just to show you how the loco operates. So again, we've got to switch on the battery to get the electrical power to the engine, and then just wait on the water and the oil temperature getting to the right temperature, so we can actually power on the engine. So I'll switch on the lights. So you can see now that I've switched on the external lights, so you can see they're illuminated at the front, and you can see the metallic panelling and almost like the metal beating of the sheet. When this train's been made in the 70s, then obviously they've not got the production processes they've got now, so it tends to look a bit more bashed and worn than it would for one of the newer German locomotives. So it's quite nice to try and kind of replicate that in Substance and kind of get not a perfectly glossy finish on it. You've got some dirt and you've got some kind of metallic panelling effect. If I go back in the cab, I'll switch on the tail lights to red just so we can see them. So it's got the red tail light at the back, which I think the colour needs a bit tweaked on these a bit. Again, this is a work in progress. But you can see the light pull from the front lights along the track there as well, which is quite nice and unreal. What I need to do is put it to engine only, and then if I basically start the engine, if I release both brakes, then I can get the locomotive moving. So you can see how nice it looks and unreal with the nice lighting in the early morning and the metallic shaders and the PBR rendering. So it picks up some nice highlights even at that time in the morning. What we can also do is we can adjust the seat while we're sitting in the seat, and we can move it forward and back and change the height of it, which is quite nice. In terms of the gameplay now, this is still work in progress, so you can see you had a bit over a camera effect whenever the loco was coming to a stop and the camera was moving forward quite abruptly. So these are things that we need to tweak, and obviously we're still working on a lot of the controls and setting up the tutorial, so it recognises the objectives that you're going through and recognises the switch positions. But in terms of this, we're still tweaking a lot of the shaders and a lot of the material colours just to try and match them better to the reference and match other TSW locomotives that are on release already, just so they're all kept at that consistent standard, adding in the same amount of dirt and getting the reds consistent across the loco range. Still tweaking the lighting and the other operation effects of levers and engine speed and engine performance. But in terms of this now, it's a good work in progress. It's almost a first pass of having everything implemented, so we can start testing the loco, how it works, how it drives and brakes, and multiple units set up, and start blocking in scenarios in the tutorial that we started blocking in already.